Welcome back to Inside the Rink podcast. In episode 39, we will cover Dallas eliminates Winnipeg, Florida eliminates Toronto, Edmonton eliminates Vegas, and Carolina eliminates Washington. Chris and I will predict the Eastern and Western Conference Finals. And I'd like to welcome my co-host, Chris LaValle. Chris, how are you doing today?
Listen, we answering each episode. Just call it the Chris's weather segment, because I feel like every episode I talk about the weather somehow. But it's the end of May almost, and I'm in a sweatshirt, and I'm freezing. What is going on?
Well, if you want to talk about weather, Chris, for a quick second here, I was golfing in 30-degree weather, shorts. Like, I was having a good time, loving life. And then it goes to +2 this weekend with projection of snow, if it shows you the weather that Manitoba has.
I'll tell you, my favorite story, I tell this all the time, is I think it was end of April, maybe early May. Me and my future brother-in-law, we went golfing. We teed off, and it was snowing. We got to the second hole. It was sunny and almost like it was like a shift. 60. It was like 60. Get to the fifth hole, and it's raining again, and it's a giant hill. And so after we get out of the cart, I'm walking down the hill, and I slip and fall all the way down the hill. And then all of a sudden, I'm dry again by the ninth hole because it's beautiful again.
Oh, wow. Oh, I wish I had that story for golfing this weekend. Don't get me wrong, I'm not the greatest golfer. I'm trying to get better, but it's +6, a bit of wind, so there's the breeze. I'm in a sweatshirt, I'm in nice pants and all that, so just trying to survive. And it feels like it's been a long time since you and I have talked hockey. There's a lot going on in the hockey world, and the series that they ended, and a lot of surprises maybe for some people in their brackets. I know with a lot of chatter around X and all that, and just social media in general, there's a lot of surprises and a lot of broken brackets. I know mine is broken, Chris. I don't know about you, but here we are, the final four. There's only one more round after this.
I know. It's crazy that it's almost coming to an end.
Yeah, and speaking of almost coming to an end, there's just a lot of things to take in and grasp. Like, we're so close to the draft and free agency. And before we get into all of this today, I'd like to hear a word from our sponsor, DraftKings Sportsbook.
DraftKings Sportsbook is Boston's hometown sportsbook. It's live right here in Massachusetts. Bet local on all your favorite sports from the comfort of your own home with DraftKings. To celebrate, all new customers will receive up to $150 in bonus bets when you sign up for DraftKings Sportsbook using code ITR. You can now bet local on money lines, spreads, props, and more with one of America's top-rated sportsbooks. That's DraftKings Sportsbook. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app. Sign up with the code ITR to get up to $150 in bonus bets to use now that mobile sports betting is live in Massachusetts. That's code ITR only at DraftKings Sportsbook.
If your loved one is experiencing problems with gambling, call 800-327-5050 or visit helplinema.org to speak with a trained specialist free and confidentially 24/7. Must be 21 plus, physically present in Mass. Eligibility restrictions apply, subject to regulatory licensing requirements. Eligibility and deposit restrictions apply. Opt-in required. Bonus issued as free bets. Terms at DraftKings.com/M.
Chris, what a week this last week was. Not many game sevens, very intense game sixes. And speaking of game six, the Winnipeg Jets and Dallas Stars ended in 6 games, which it was a series that looked like it might go 7. As I know you watched the game, I watched the game, is just taking it in from the day is that was a series that felt like it should go 7, and I don't want to say deserved to go 7, but the teams played like it was a 7-game series, regardless of it ending when it did. Dallas, obviously, with the circumstances, the Jets were playing with a bit of a heavy heart, and God rest Brad Scheifele, and just condolences to the Scheifele family. But Oh my goodness. What a game Game 6 was. A 1-1 hockey game. The Jets get the best performance as an overall group out of their entire lineup and their best performance out of Connor Hellebuck on the road. He had the 2 shutouts this series. He looked like he had turned a corner, and it seemed like Dallas had figured him out when they needed to, and that's why they won the series, in my opinion. But ultimately, looking at it, that road stat going over 10 in your last 10 road games in the playoffs, that's going to haunt them into next playoffs and maybe beyond that.
Yeah, it wasn't great for them. At home, but I'm sorry, on the road, because at home, what's the record?
At home this year, they only lost one game.
Your record. What's your record that you kept telling me about?
Oh, off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you. I'm sorry.
I think you said 23-0 when you're in the building.
Okay. The games that I have been at when I've seen them live, I've been very fortunate and all that. But the Jets, I've been to 23 home games, and they have not lost the game while I've been there, which is, people will say, "Oh, you're tracking and all that," but there's apps for that, so it's not hard to do.
Mm-hmm.
So, sorry, I guess a little context would have been great, but
sorry, that's my bad.
No, it's all good.
Going back, you had the battle of the 2 best goalies in hockey in this series.
Oh, definitely. And you could argue the same thing even in the St. Louis series. Binnington stood on his head, but he mentally crumbled when he needed, or not when he needed to. He mentally crumbled when it was the absolute worst time possible.
And it's funny you say his name, because you talk about voodoo with the goalies. Binnington seems to be the clutch goalie when you need a clutch save. He did it for Canada and the 4 Nations, and for the most part in that series against Winnipeg, when he needed to, he made clutch saves. But right now, and I've heard this a couple places, and maybe we did talk about it on here last week or a couple weeks ago, but it was almost like the Ottinger versus Hellebuck matchup was like, who's going to be the starting goalie in the Olympics for Team USA? And both of them, and honestly, in that game 6, showed that they both want it. Like you said, you saw Hellebuck's best game. I think you saw one of Ottinger's best games. And it just came down to a lucky break for Dallas to beat Hellebuck the way they did in overtime to take the series. I thought it was going 7. Watching that game, I thought Winnipeg had it, and there was going to be a game 7, and my bracket might have been busted.
Yeah, and my bracket's been busted because 3 of the 4 teams in the finals are not who I had the conference finals, pardon me. But 3 of the 4 that are in the conference finals are not what my bracket predicted. So, and that's another thing. It's so interesting when you look at how things have shaped up goaltending wise. Look at Edmonton. Edmonton's a great example, in my opinion. Calvin Pickard, it sucks he got hurt, don't get me wrong, but Stuart Skinner, he stepped up when he needed to, and when the team really needed to rely on him. Back-to-back shutouts, that's admirable.
He looked like the Skinner that you saw in game 4, 5, and 6 of last year's Stanley Cup, when Edmonton had their backs against the wall. He stood tall and did his job, and they got a game 7. And they kept their season alive, and obviously things went off the rails in game 7, but that's where we're at right now. The question they have, though, and coming up to their next series, who do you give the net to, assuming Pickard's healthy?
You see, when it comes to giving the net to a player, I think that's solely dependent on what they've done, and maybe Edmonton runs Pickard as their season starter. Maybe it's a situation where Skinner's their backup in the regular season, but they decide, you know what, he's the guy we want to run in playoffs because he gets hot at the right time. Maybe that's the situation they're in. But it also comes down to, is there a better goaltender available on the free agent market or in trade? And we talked about this last week and a few weeks actually with Binnington at the deadline, and then I can't remember off the top of my head if it was last week or a couple of weeks ago, with John Gibson.
Mm.
You got to look at these scenarios, and maybe Edmonton's mulling it over. Maybe if they win the cup this season, they decide to even upgrade in net, and they have a 3 goaltender situation now. They have
But-
Skinner as the backup, and it's less pressure on him. Maybe that's where they go.
But they head into the series with Dallas, and if Pickard's healthy, who do you roll with in game one? I mean, I would say Skinner off the top of my head, but
I would argue Skinner's earned the net like just off of 2 shutouts. But if he gets shelled in game one, you go with Pickard if he's healthy.
Yep. That's my thought too.
That's like, look at the situation with Winnipeg on the road against St. Louis. Hellebuck got shelled on 3 road games, so they pulled him. He got pulled in 3 road games. Almost pulled in 1 home game. Almost. But not quite. If he gets shelled in 1 game and pulled, you start Pickard the next game. That's where Edmonton is at. But game 1 is going to show, like with Edmonton and Dallas, it's going to be a whole different series from Edmonton-Vegas. And I'd argue Vegas is a better team than Dallas, just off of what they have right now.
Off
You
the
may not
talent.
agree with. You may
Off
not
the
agree
talent,
with.
maybe. Off the name talent, maybe.
Okay, but you may not agree with me off of just face value. When it comes to Vegas, they've gone deep and they've won, and it seems like Dallas cannot get past that conference final point again. They went there. They went to the Stanley Cup final in the bubble, lost against Tampa, but it seems like they cannot punch through year after year. This is their 3rd consecutive season in the conference final. Edmonton, yes, it's their 2nd as well, but Edmonton went to the Cup final last year, almost won the Cup. Florida, they got the same story going for them. 3 straight conference finals, back-to-back Stanley Cup finals in their pocket. These are good teams realistically we're speaking about, but with Dallas, maybe Rantanen is what they needed to push themselves through. We'll see if that suffices in the Stanley Cup playoffs or in the finals, pardon me. But I like the way that Edmonton has played it. Last year, nothing went right for them until they needed it to go right in the Stanley Cup final in game 4, 5, and 6. This year, nothing, like it seems like nothing's going right, but they seem to string together a win and they come together as a team. They have a good team on paper. Dallas also has a good team on paper. Realistically, are you going to look at Edmonton and say, like, count them out completely?
No.
Like, yeah. Yes, their goaltending is not great, but you cannot count a team out that has arguably 2 of the best players in the world on their team.
Mm-hmm.
So just bringing it circle here, it's like Dallas also advanced and beat the President's Trophy winning team. They beat them for a reason. They're not a team to kind of shudder at. So
It's also surprising going back to Edmonton for a second. We entered the preview of the playoff when we did that episode a couple weeks ago, where we said they had all these injuries coming into the playoffs. And I think you and I almost said, with the injuries, there's no shot. And then they got healthy. Evander Kane came back and made his season debut in the playoffs, and they look like a different team again because they look like, obviously, I'm not going to say fully healthy because we all know the Stanley Cup playoffs. We all know that everybody has those injuries, and they all come out later on. But they look like they're gelling and they're on the right level right now where this is going to be a hell of a series coming up with Dallas.
Oh, absolutely. And with the potential for Matthias Ekholm to return. That's something that a lot of people aren't really looking at. Ekholm could return at any point of the series. Maybe late in the series when Edmonton needs it, but that's a big add to Edmonton's lineup if he comes back. And that's an if because of the extent of his injury. It's undisclosed, obviously, but when they're saying it was long-term when it happened, or not long-term, just it's going to affect his availability in playoffs. When that's being said, like there's kind of 2 lines to it: undisclosed, but affects his availability. If he comes back, that's great for Edmonton. And it's like Heiskanen coming back for Dallas in the Winnipeg series. It's a boost for the team, but maybe he's not 100%. And truthfully, I didn't think Heiskanen was 100% coming back. And with his minutes not being as strong as they usually are for a game, I think that was a representative factor of it. But here we are. Dallas advanced, Edmonton advanced. Those are two heavy-hitting teams against each other in round one. And a series that ended just last night was Florida and Toronto. Florida beats Toronto in Game 7. It was another shelling on Toronto's home ice. What could be Mitch Marner's last game. There's a lot to unpack with that series because Toronto goes up 2-0 in the series. Game 3, they go up 3-1. Looks like they're going to go and win 3 straight games and maybe advance. Okay, a blip in the road, 2-1. And then it's 2-2. Then it's 3-2. Toronto ties at 3-3. And then after a Game 6 shutout, they get shelled on home ice yet again. That was a very thrilling series to watch. Chris, I don't know about you. It's given Toronto's makeup and Berube's first season as a head coach of the Leafs. He took that team as far as I think he could. But this team obviously has a mental element to their game that they need to overcome. Because between you and I, when they came out of that Tampa series and faced Florida, when they got out of the first round finally for the first time in 20 years, or almost 20 years, that wasn't a team that was going to go far. It was a team that, okay, they scored the goal, they got on, and now the pressure's on. Because Toronto wins Game 1 and then gentlemen sweep. This year, it's a Game 7, and I'm thinking we're seeing the effects of a team that cannot perform with its top players in a Game 7 setting. That's representative of a 6-1, just an absolute mop of the floor of the Toronto Maple Leafs. And speaking of the Toronto Maple Leafs, like the fans throwing jerseys on ice, I don't agree with that. Is through thick and thin, people should support their teams. Because when you think about it, how do you think San Jose Sharks fans felt this season? Or Chicago a couple of years ago? Look at teams like that who haven't made the playoffs in quite some time.
Yeah, there's an extent to the level that you go to.
Yeah, and then you got Toronto and just narrowly, just barely getting in. And now, like, they beat Ottawa in 6, and then they take Florida, the defending Stanley Cup champions, to a 7th game. And ultimately, it comes down to the fact of, hey, this team, they have something there. They just need to overcome that mental hurdle. Maybe we'll see them in the conference finals and or the Stanley Cup finals next year. Once they make their roster tweaks in the summer, add at the deadline, and maybe they're going to go for it. Maybe they feel like next year's their year after what they did this year.
I think the question becomes what happens with Marner. And to me, this series, I look at it as a big what-if series in that round of the 4 series we had. Because realistically, Toronto was up 2-0, and they lost their starting goalie in Anthony Stolarz. And they went to Joseph Woll. Not that he wasn't a capable goalie to carry them, but losing your starting goalie, and when you're up 2-0 and you saw the momentum shift, we talked about it with Edmonton and LA. You know, one thing happened where a challenge call after an Edmonton goal, and the whole series changed. You know, Toronto loses Stolarz, and the whole series changes. Yes, they did win a game. They forced Game 7, but you saw it last night. Like, it was a whole different series once Stolarz left.
Yeah. And another thing, just coming off of the fact of Stolarz leaving and then last night's game, is Toronto goes down 3-0, scores that one goal. Domi scored the lone goal. If Florida doesn't score 40 seconds or 40-something seconds later, Toronto could have actually got themselves within one goal. Is that the building came alive. The team actually looked like, oh, we have some life, and they were starting to play with a bit of purpose. One bad turnover and then an odd man rush. Done. The game's a 4-1 game now, and Toronto sunk back into the hole as if it was 3-0 yet again. So that's where that series ended. And out of the 4 series we just witnessed, the Carolina-Washington series, I didn't see Washington. Like, I remember when you and I had predicted this, and this is the one team I felt like was going to move on. Carolina did not. It didn't seem like they had much of a challenge at their hand, and that's no disrespect to Washington. They won the games that they did, and almost won the President's Trophy. But Carolina didn't seem like they had much difficulty knocking them out of the playoffs. And that's just looking at the games that they played, watching a couple, Carolina looked like they did this with ease. And there was nothing really standing in their way of another Eastern Conference final.
It almost kind of looked like Ovechkin ran out of gas in a way. Like, he only had 1 goal in the series. He was a -3. It seemed like you said, Carolina just overmatched Washington the whole series. But when your best player is struggling, same can be said with Toronto with Auston Matthews. He was kind of missing that whole series. But it's a tough one. I mean, I was shocked by how many games it went. You and I think both said at least 6 or 7, and the fact that it was just 5, and it was almost to the point of saying dominating the series.
Yeah.
That was just dominating by Carolina. That they're clicking on all cylinders. And a piece that we talked about in the trade deadline that was kind of under the radar was the piece they got back in the Rantanen trade. Stankoven has looked like he's found his home in Carolina.
And I completely agree. I completely agree with you on that. Stankoven, just from day one, he fit like a glove in Carolina. We had talked about that. Rantanen may not have been the best fit in Carolina. Maybe if they would have kept him, he would have ended up becoming that playoff performer that we're seeing right now. But that, I think, what Carolina got in return for for Rantanen, they fared off quite well. And you had 2 first-round picks and 2 third-round picks. And that gives you some extra flexibility at next year's deadline. And maybe you don't use all of that. Maybe you decide to draft some players and see what you have in the pipeline. Then maybe that's what Carolina's going to do. And you never know, but why wouldn't you use that draft capital you acquired in a trade? That's 4 picks. Why wouldn't you use something like that? Then again, Carolina could also be in the position of maybe they win the cup this year and they want to solidify their roster for what they have, add maybe good defensemen, a good scoring forward, and be another threat in next year's playoff. But Carolina, they have a tall task when it comes to the Florida Panthers and the Eastern Conference Finals. I don't want to say it's quite dicey because I truly think that Toronto-Florida series was going to be whoever goes to the Stanley Cup Finals from the East. That's what I felt. That's how those 2 teams played. Maybe we'll be sitting here next week, Chris, and you'll be pointing at me like, haha, you're wrong. But I really and getting over to the prediction part of this stuff, I really think Carolina is going to get knocked off by Florida in 5 games. You might not agree with me, but
nope. And I got Carolina in 6.
Okay.
I think this is where Florida. 6. I think this is where Florida runs out.
Really?
Frederick Anderson's playing at the top of his game right now. And we talked about Stankoven, and Andrei Svechnikov has completely found his game. He's got 7 goals in his last 7 games in the playoffs. I know 3 of those are off a hat trick in game 4 against the Devils, but he has 3 goals in his last 3 games in the playoffs. Like, maybe the time off hurts them, but he's been red hot as of late. So I just think Carolina right now is playing at a top tier level to reach the Stanley Cup this year.
That's where I'm kind of dicey about Carolina because they have the guys to take them, but look at how Florida has played this year. They have the team to just be physically dominant against a team like Carolina. At Carolina, I thought the Washington series was going to go 7. I thought it was going to be a very, very physical series compared to what it was. That's what I thought. It didn't turn out to be that way. When you look at Florida, Paul Maurice, he rolls all 4 lines, and it's constant. They're hitting you, and they're trying to beat you down and make sure they can get, like, they're jumping on loose pucks. They're trying to pound you out of, like, pound you off the puck pretty much. You look at a team like Carolina, they don't got all of that physical. They don't have all of those physical players who come up and just really kind of punch against you and be able to bully you a bit. Like Bennett, Marchand, Kachuk, like Lundell. Like Florida's got the guys. You got Barkov, Schmidt. You got these guys who are experienced veterans. They're going to hit. They are going to play that physical style. Carolina, yes, Aho, Svechnikov, Stankoven, they are great players. Don't get me wrong. I don't want to get that twisted, but when you hear those guys and see their resume compared to Florida's, Florida, 2 straight Stanley Cup finals, a 3rd Eastern Conference final. Are you really going to look at those 2 resumes and say Carolina can outmatch Florida physically?
No, but I also think it's who's the hot. I know you say voodoo, but I always say who's the hot goalie. Bobrovsky was hot, but Frederik Andersen's been doing it all playoffs, and he's just the hottest goalie in the Stanley Cup playoffs right now. So I think that helps. Also, I think the other thing is we haven't seen much offensively from Matthew Tkachuk, and so until that changes, my opinion might change. But for right now, what I've seen,
that's another reason I'm saying Florida in 5, because if Kachuk gets hot, that's a player you do not want to deal with physically and on the scoreboard. Because if he's biting you in 2 areas, how do you realistically look at Matthew Tkachuk, who's beating you physically and beating you on the scoreboard, and say, we got to shut him down in like both aspects of the game? How do you shut down one player in 2 different ways? It's almost impossible.
the X factor for Florida to me, and the reason why I can see 100% Florida making it, that third line is just gelling. Like the fact that you're getting that kind of production from your third line and Lindell, Luosterainen, and Marchand, they've just clicked right from the get go, and they're doing it in the play. They haven't skipped a beat since they got together, and so that's the X factor. I mean, if they are almost, I want to say a point, like one of them has a point per game, even if it's one of them has a point here and the other one has a point here, if they somehow match that up, they're tough. Florida's a tough team to beat. But the guy, Frederik Andersen playing at the level he's playing at is going to be tough to beat for anybody offensively for Florida.
And don't get me wrong, Anderson's played great, but Bobrovsky hasn't really. I don't think he's been shelled much, if at all, in the playoffs.
I don't think so.
Bobrovsky, he's had a great defense in front of him, and Jones looks like he's coming to his own yet again.
Bobrovsky, game 1, 2, and 3 gave up a combined 13 goals against the Maple Leafs. So 5 goals game 1, 4 in game 2, and 4 in game 3.
It's not terrible, but it's not playoff playoff contention level. But when you look at it, he still won game 3. So
Right.
you gotta kind of factor all these things in, and maybe Anderson falls apart. I don't think that's gonna happen. Florida's in a position where you roll all 4 lines and eventually it's gonna get to you.
Looking at Frederick Anderson really quick, through what is it? They've played 10 games. He's given up 1-1-3, 1-1-2, 0-2-1.
Wow.
So he's been giving up more than 3 goals in any game in the playoffs right now.
So basically, if Carolina, if they can score 3 goals, they got a good chance to win the game.
Right. And I honestly, when I was working on one of the previews, I think he's just under 2 goals against average.
Wow. And yeah, no, this is going to be a tough series in Florida and Carolina. Like, I think 5, you think 6?
Yep.
When it comes to Dallas Edmonton, I have a strong feeling it's going to be a 7-game series.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we're seeing an Edmonton Florida rematch this year. And I already see the grin on your face. Looks like you do not agree with me yet again.
So before we came live, I messaged you and I said I had a random stat.
Yeah.
And the random stat is the last team to have their AHL and NHL, or I'm sorry, the last NHL team to also win the Stanley Cup and have their AHL affiliate win the Calder Cup. Do you know the team?
Not off the top of my head.
It was 1995. It was the New Jersey Devils, and their affiliate was the Albany River Rats. And right now, there's 4 teams left in the Stanley Cup playoffs. 2 of them have AHL affiliates still left in the Calder Cup playoffs. That's the Dallas Stars and the Texas Stars, and the Charlotte Checkers and the Carolina Hurricanes. My Stanley Cup is the same as my AHL Calder Cup final. I have Dallas and Carolina, and Texas and Charlotte.
Okay.
And I have Dallas beating Edmonton, like you said, in 7.
Yeah. The reason I see that Edmonton-Dallas series going 7, I'm going to keep it brief here. Edmonton got so close last season. 15 of 16 wins. They can't ask for more. They went right to the final buzzer, losing 2-1. And I don't see why. Like, hey, you're in the conference final yet again. What is another Stanley Cup final? Maybe it is a Dallas defeat in 7, but I don't see Edmonton with the way that they're rolling right now, with a potential return of Matthias Ekholm. I don't see why they wouldn't get into the Stanley Cup final, because Dallas, they're going to run out of gas eventually. It seems like they're firing on all cylinders right now.
Again, I said it last week to you there about the Dallas and Winnipeg series. We still haven't seen the best of Wyatt Johnston yet.
I could argue that those last 2 games that he played, he played as strong as he could. Yes, game 5 was a shutout. Wyatt Johnston was up and down the ice.
We haven't seen, I'm sorry, so let me rephrase that. We haven't seen his best on the score sheet yet.
Okay.
So that was my fault. Let me rephrase that.
All good.
So Edmonton is loaded with star power. We know that. McDavid, Draisaitl, Nugent Hopkins had a great season. Corey Perry had a decent season. They have the names. But to me, going back, like you look at last year, Dallas was missing that true score. And I think Mikko Rantanen coming into that team this season, they look completely different in the playoffs. That it's going to be a battle, and it's going to come down to, honestly, a big save by Jake Ottinger in Game 7 that propels them to the Stanley Cup.
Okay.
Maybe I'll call that my bold prediction, is Jake Ottinger makes a game-saving save that gets Dallas to the Stanley Cup playoffs. To the Stanley Cup finals.
All right. Well, Chris, I think that does it for Inside the Ring episode 39. Thank you for listening, and we'll be back next week.